Hi, welcome to Greek 3, our next to the last session together. We're going to be looking here at the imperfect tense, chapter 22. We only have one more week together. Next week, we will be just going through chapter 23 and reviewing for the final exam, for the oral part, as well as for the Moodle part. I won't tell you when those are happening yet. I'll wait until we're closer to the event. You don't need to know right now when. What you need to do is be studying. Some of you need to complete homework. Some of you haven't done homework for the last 2 or 3 weeks and you're behind. You need to complete your homework, all of it, in order to pass this course. You need to do it well and honestly. Don't copy down someone else's answers. Don't go to the Bible or an English translation and just copy down a translation when it says which verse it is in Greek. Try to translate as much as you can from the Greek New Testament. When you don't know the answer, go to the back of the book if it has the answer, or go to your English translation. Look at the answer there, compare it to another English translation. Go to BibleGateway.com and look at, for example, the Lexham English Bible is a good one to look at, or the ESV is also a good one, but not perhaps as good as the Lexham English Bible because that version is made by the scholars who produced the Logos software, which is one that Dr. McIver recommends, and he even has an additional appendix in the 6th edition of his textbook, which I have here. Now, most of you are actually using the 5th edition, and that's fine. The only difference it makes is that your page numbers are two pages different from this one. And you don't have the final appendix, which is about this Logos program. But you're not going to be using the Logos program if indeed you go into the MPhil program in Christian Theology, New Testament. And I might remind you that you must complete all 6 semesters of Greek in order to do that. That means next semester you have 2 classes, Greek 4 and Greek 5, which is Greek reading. You have 2 classes, so we have twice as much work. We will not have twice as many classes, but we will have twice as much work, and that means we will do it by means of homework. So get ready for more work. So get caught up. You must do your homework in order to finish this course and pass this course. You must do all of your homework. Send your homework, upload it to Moodle. If you can't get it on Moodle, email it to Masood. That's the best thing to do. He keeps track of who has done which homework. He does that for me. So I'm asking you to go to first of all, upload it to Moodle. That shouldn't be a problem, but if you're having problems, ask Masood or email it to Masood in an emergency, but get your homework done. And then you need to complete the Moodle quizzes, all of those. Even if you are late, complete the Moodle quizzes. So I just had the doorbell ring, and I'm not sure where we stopped before I was interrupted. But I think we were sharing the screen of the textbook. And the only other thing I wanted to point out to you is he has a helpful let's see, annotate. He has a helpful section here on the difference between the imperfect and the aorist tenses, chapter 22.6. That's worth reading carefully and studying the difference between, for example, the aorist indicative active, which you already know. For example, for the verb ago is agagon because it's a strong aorist. And page 114 in your textbook, if you've forgotten it, go back and learn the strong aorist forms of those verbs. Those are special verbs that we need to know. But the imperfect looks different. It's not this aorist stem agagon, agog, and then, for example, the aorist agagon, it's simply agon because it's ago with an augment and the imperfect ending. And he goes through and shows, for example, ebalon, we have the aorist stem, and here we have the present stem, but we have an augment and we have the imperfect ending. As we'll look at in just a moment, as soon as we see this present stem with an augment, that should be the signal for us that we have an imperfect and not an aorist, because we know that the aorist stem of balo, I throw, the aorist stem I threw, past tense, is with one lambda, whereas the present stem I throw is with two lambdas. So it's worth studying this section 22.6, the difference between the imperfect and the aorist tenses. The other one that we need to pay attention to is the imperfect indicative of middle and passive verbs. And here he uses the example of dechomai. The reason we need to pay special attention to this is that we have another set of endings. The new endings that we have to learn so far are these. Sorry, let's keep switching on me. On, es, en, amen, ete, on, which are the same as the strong aorist endings from page 114. So those are not really new to us. They're just new if we add them here in the imperfect, but the ones that are new are these amen, u, eto, omitha, estha, onto. I was welcoming. You were welcoming. He, she, it was welcoming. We were welcoming. Edech este, you plural were welcoming. Edech onto. These are the middle and passive forms of the imperfect indicative. So we have two sets of forms, and one set we already know. So really, we only have one new set to learn for this chapter. Really, the imperfect tense is really easy when you really get down to it. So let's go to, I'm going to stop sharing this. Let's go to a presentation that I made that I think will make things plainer. And we'll start that, and I hope it works. Start the slideshow. Here we have it. I hope things work okay. Right, all right. Here you see a chart of the relative frequency of tenses in the New Testament. And I'm going to see if I can get my spotlight back. Just a moment. I think I can get it. Not sure it appears here. I'm not seeing it here on my screen, but it should be showing there. And if you see me leaning around in the corner, it's because I'm having to do that. But on your screen, you should be seeing my presentation, I think, without any problem. And you'll notice that this graph shows the frequency of the indicative mood here in the back. It's this back row. How many times in the New Testament these tenses are used? Here's the present tense, nearly 6,000, 5,500 times. Here's the aorist tense. Notice this is all aorist tenses here, this row. The aorist tense indicative, which is the main mood that verbs are used. The indicative mood, you remember, is the mood of statement or question, of simply usually stating facts or asking a question. Nearly 6,000 times the aorist tense. And the imperfect tense is used about 1,500 times. The future tense, almost the same. We'll learn the future tense next semester. And the perfect tense is used not quite 1,000 times. And the pluperfect, which we don't even learn those forms because it's not used very much at all in the New Testament. So it's not really worth learning. We have it more in English translation than we do in the actual Greek New Testament. Now, the imperfect you see is used 1,500 times, which is not nearly as much as the present tense or the aorist tense. And the imperfect is not used in any other mood. Notice it's not used in the participle. There's no imperfect infinitive. There's no imperfect subjunctive or imperative form. None of these. So we really have a simple job in chapter 22. Now, even though it's not used as much as the aorist, it is very important, extremely important, because it will actually, what it often does is give us background information that will point us to the main emphasis, which will usually be expressed in the aorist tense. But let's go and get some examples. Otherwise, we're talking about theory without really any content. Now, first of all, how is the imperfect formed? And we need to keep in mind the imperfect is formed with the augment. Now, the augment is of no surprise to us. We know about the augment. We learned about it with the aorist tense in chapter 12. The thing to watch out for with the augment is if you see it where you're not used to seeing it. For example, if you see it with what should be a present stem and you see an augment, it might be a sign for you that you're dealing with an imperfect. So let's look at how the imperfect is formed. Basically, this is the way I like to look at it. The imperfect is formed by taking the present stem of a verb, adding the augment, and then adding the imperfect endings. So for example, if we take luo, we have the present stem lu, not loose. I call loose the aorist stem. Now, Dr. McIver likes to talk about sa, sas, sen, you notice from the textbook. But for me, I like to put the sigma as the stem, and I like to talk about the aorist stem is loose. And then the endings are a, as, in, amin, ate, an. It's much easier for me to remember those and to remember the aorist stem is formed by adding a sigma than it is to do it the way Dr. McIver does it. So let's say this is the present stem, lu, and I add the imperfect endings, which are on, es, en, amen, ete, an. The same ones that we learned when we learned the strong aorist. It's the same endings as the strong aorist. Remember for apon and agag, agagon, agagon, sorry, and apon and adon, those strong aorist verbs back on page 114. Hope you haven't forgotten them. If you have, you need to review them. Now take this, but take the present stem now, not the aorist stem, but take the present stem and add the augment to it, and you have the imperfect. And notice that lu does not have the sigma, so it's not an aorist stem. This is a weak aorist verb. It should not have this ending. This is not a strong aorist. Lu is a weak aorist, or a first aorist, whichever term you use. It would normally have sigma, loose in the aorist. But when you take the present stem and add these endings and then add the augment, you have an imperfect. So you have eluon, elus, eluin, eluamen, eluete, eluon. Notice you have to watch out. It could be first person singular, I, or it could be third person plural, they. It looks the same, so only the context will tell us which one it is. If it's I or they. The rest of them are you singular and he, she, it, and we, the first person plural, we, you plural, they. Now there are some exceptions. For example, estheo lengthens to estheon. So, well, this is actually not an exception because the epsilon becomes eta when you add the augment. So it just lengthens. Verbs that begin with a vowel usually lengthen the vowel. So estheon, theon is the estheo, sorry, present tense, I am eating or I eat. Estheon, I was eating. Not I ate, that would be aorist. I was eating is the imperfect. Continuous action, I was eating. Now we will add some other forms here. For example, fellow is irregular in that instead of adding epsilon as an augment, it adds eta, almost as though the original form of the verb was ethello, but it isn't. It's just thello and adds a thelon, not ethelon. So some of these you need to keep track of. And if you have contract verbs, you'll notice that the contraction rules from chapter 5, in the case of epsilon omega verbs, or chapter 8, in the case of alpha omega verbs, those contraction rules still take place. You add on, it becomes un, because the epsilon contracts with the on to become un. And here we have an alpha omega verb. Remember erotao? Some of you did not get this one when on the oral quiz. I ask, or I am asking, eroto. And when you add the augment, eroton, notice that the augment comes here, not at the beginning, not because we have a preposition here, lengthens to eta, eroton. And you can easily think this is a participle ending if you forget, first of all, that we have an augment here and participles don't have augments, and we have a contraction. And that contraction is not showing a circumflex accent. It's showing here an acute accent. That's another clue. The augment and this accent are a clue that we don't have. We recognize eperotao, but we don't have with this augment, we can't have a participle. Participles don't have augments. So this must be an imperfect and means I was asking, or it could be they were asking. Remember, on is just combined with the alpha to become on. So it could be the imperfect I was asking or the imperfect they were asking. Again, we have here a contraction, and the imperfect shows the augment. Here, after, in this case, the iota doesn't lengthen. There's no way to lengthen an iota. It just adds the epsilon, the augment. Peripateo, peripatun. Here is the epsilon that combines with the ending on to become I was walking, or they were walking. Remember, on here and here, I or they. So both are possibilities, but because of the contraction, we have un. Echo is also irregular. Remember, here I have irregular or other imperfect forms. Echo, you always have in any language exceptions. Echo doesn't lengthen to eta, echon. It becomes epsilon iota, echon. And mellow, instead of emelon, becomes amelon. It also is like thello. It adds an, the augment is eta instead of epsilon. Parakaleo, we might expect the alpha to lengthen to omega or to eta, but it doesn't. It's just simply parekalun. But notice here this contraction as we had here. So parakalo, I request, well, request is one of the meanings of parakaleo. I request, I am requesting, and the imperfect I was requesting. De, it is necessary. De, it was being necessary, or it was necessary. It was being is a strange English. So if you put it was necessary, that will be fine. But the actual indication of the imperfect is the continuous action. It was being necessary, or possibly it began to be necessary, as we'll see in just a moment. Didome are one of the me verbs. They're always a little different, and their ending is u. I was giving. It did do. Sorry, it was it. He, she, it was giving. Third singular. U. Tifeme, and the third plural. Tif son. The imperfect endings are a little different, and you'll need to study the textbook, the section on the imperfect of me verbs, to get those endings all correct. Now the middle and passive, we've already mentioned. Let's take a verb like paru omai, and we'll add the augment and the stem, paru. And then the endings are not on, es, in, amen, eta, on, but amen, u, eta, ametha, este, onto. Those are the middle and passive endings in the imperfect. Middle and passive. The other endings, on, es, in, amen, eta, on, are the active endings. These are the middle and passive endings. So, but these verbs are translated usually active when we translate into English. So, eparu omein simply means I was going or I was coming. Eparu u, you were coming. Eparu eto, he, she, it was coming or going. Remember, Greek doesn't tell us, make a distinction between going or coming. We have to do that with the prepositions. Eparu ometha, we were coming, we were going. These are verbs that, well, we call them deponent right now. Verbs that look middle or passive. They have middle or passive endings. Their forms are in Greek are middle or passive, but their translation in English is active voice. Not I was being commed or something like that. That doesn't make sense, but simply I was coming. We were coming. E paru ametha. E paru esther, you were coming. E paru onta, they were coming. Now there are some, here also some things we need to notice. Pros omai, pros a. Notice the lengthening here of the initial vowel, but there's no difference in pronunciation. Remember when we learned this diphthong? We had it in the first chapter. When we learned this diphthong, we learned that pros omai is simply still pros eta, but we need to notice that the epsilon has changed to eta. U angelidzomai. In the middle, it's a middle voice verb. It means I preach the good news, I proclaim the good news. It's in the middle form, middle or passive. I am proclaiming the good news, but we translate it active, so we could say it's deponent. The imperfect is uengelids eta. Remember two gammas together? This one sounds like nu. Uengelids eta. I was proclaiming the good news. Or actually, the other possibility with the imperfect, I began to proclaim the good news. I was proclaiming or began to proclaim. Erch omai becomes erch onta in the third person plural of the imperfect. They were coming or they were going. Erch omai is very similar in meaning to paru omai. Go back to chapter 9 to get some of these, review some of these deponent verbs that you may have forgotten. Erch omai, paru omai, very similar in meaning go or come. I was going, erchomai. I'm sorry, I am coming, erchomai. I was coming, erchonto. Imperfect. Present tense, imperfect tense. Erchomai, I am coming or going. Erchonto, augment, imperfect ending. They, third person plural, they were coming or going. This is one place, it's not like the active voice. Onta tells us plainly it's third person plural. They were coming or they were going. The contract verb martoreo, martoreto. Martoreo, I am bearing witness. Ematoreto, I was bearing witness. I was bearing witness for myself, perhaps this middle term might mean. We'll have to look at some. And then some examples. The imperfect of Amy is in the textbook. Amen, ace, ain, amen, amen, amen. I was or I was being. Is you were or you were being. In he, she, it was, or he, she, it was being. Emen, we were, or we were being. Eta, you were, or you were being. And ason, you were, or you were being. Now, McIver will not allow for you to translate I was being, you were being, he, she, it was being. It's bad English. I just use it because it gets the idea of the imperfect tense across. And in John 1:1, for example, in the beginning was being the word, was already being. The idea of the imperfect is important. And that's why I like for us to translate that way, even though it doesn't sound right and it isn't even good English. But we're Greek students and we're trying to get the idea of the tenses as we learn. Now, here are some interesting forms of the imperfect in the New Testament. I'm just giving you just a few examples just to get your mind around and the importance of learning the imperfect tense. For example, Mark 6:56, they were laying the sick. Etithessan. Now that's an imperfect form, and you'll just have to learn the forms of the me verbs. We only have a few that are really important. Dido me, tithe me, histe me, gegnu me, perhaps also apollo me, those Amy, of course. Those me verbs, there are only a few that are really important and are very common. And you just have to learn what those forms look like. Etithessan is, and you can learn those from the textbook from chapter 22, is an imperfect. They were laying the sick. And while they were laying the sick, an action takes place. What is happening here? The imperfect is supplying us background information that is important. The author wants us to see as background for what Jesus is going to do. There's another example in Mark 8:6. He broke the bread in the aorist tense right before this. And then it says, he was giving it. He was distributing it to the disciples. First, he broke it, aorist tense, actually a one-time action. He broke it, and then he was in the process, either he was giving it or he began to give it. Either one is possible with the imperfect. He began to give the bread to the disciples, and then they were distributing it. So there's a difference in the text between the aorist and the imperfect. And it's important for us to recognize that the author uses the aorist tense and the imperfect tense on purpose. And when he puts them together, when he uses the aorist or when he uses the imperfect, and they are in the same context, there's a reason why he uses one and not the other. Here we have in Acts 4:35, they were placing their money, their proceeds from the sales of their land, actually. They were placing their money at the feet of the apostles. They were placing it. And here, the translation, they began to place it, doesn't make sense because in the preceding verse, it already tells us the background they were doing this. So we already know they were placing the money at the feet of the apostles, and then something happens. What this does in the imperfect is sets the background scene. They were while this is happening, this takes place. Ananias and Sapphira do something wrong, something evil. But the context is this, and sometimes we forget the context, the background information that's so important for to understand the action that happens afterwards. Here's another example, John 8:9. After they heard what Jesus said, they either began to go away or they were going away. Either way, this gives us important information. The tense tells us it was a continuous action. Perhaps they began to go away as a result of what Jesus said. They began to go away because they didn't like what he said. John 8:25. They were proclaiming the good news. And in the context, they were proclaiming the good news. Then the action that follows is to be understood. Imperfect in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 9, you'll notice that our me verbs have a little bit different form. Instead of apollonto, apollomi, this upsilon is stronger than the omicron, so it takes over apollonto. And they were being destroyed, or they were destroyed. Why does Paul use the imperfect tense? I think he wants to emphasize what happened as a result of their action. They were being. He wants us to, as it were, enter into what was happening, to see how strong this is. They were being destroyed by their grumbling. And another place where the imperfect is important, in Hebrews 11:5. The imperfect of eurisko, eurisketo, were found, not in the Hebrew text, but in the Septuagint, which is the Old Testament in Greek. They translated the Hebrew text before the time of Christ into the Old Testament, and then the apostles used this translation, which we abbreviate with LXX, the Septuagint, we call it. These were being found. These were being found right with God by faith. So these are some of the places that we find the imperfect tense. It very often is used to give background information, and then the aorist tense is used to provide the primary emphasis of action, but the background is provided by the imperfect. This was happening, and then this main thing happens. But we understand the main thing because of the background information provided by the imperfect. Now, I also just exhort you, admonish you to learn the vocabulary at the end of chapter 22. I know you've had lots of vocabulary now, but you need to learn these new words. All of them are important. This one especially, the Apostle Paul likes to use it. We will meet it in Galatians. I just read it this morning in Romans, and the next edition of Prokope, I ask you to pay special attention to, because ara, this word, will show itself. It does not only mean then or therefore, it is also used as an emphasis word sometimes to single out the first word. There are certain words in the Greek New Testament that are used to say, this is important. And ara is one of those. And that's why we learn the Greek, so that we can see better what the author was wanting to emphasize, what he was wanting us to pay special attention to. So even these little words like ara, don't ignore them. Learn them well. Learn your vocabulary well. Go back and review the vocabulary words that we have had and make sure that you memorize all of these new ones. You have a new preposition that takes the genitive case in nopion, and other words here I will stop our presentation and stop sharing and come back. Now, I hope that this presentation has not been confusing to you. I don't think it will be if you study carefully chapter 22, and your homework for next time is to do all of the exercises at the end of chapter 22. When you do those, let me share my screen one more time and share the textbook. When you do these exercises, learn the vocabulary and then do the exercises. Exercise at 22.1, provide 2 English translations for each of the following corresponding to a continuous or inceptive imperfect. That means I was loosing, or I began to loose. Inceptive means something that begins. So continuous, I was loosing. Inceptive, I began to loose. So for each of these imperfect forms, you provide 2 English translations. Now you only have 15 of them. So this homework will be exercise 22.1, will be very simple. Elegon, I was saying, or I was speaking, or I began to speak. I was speaking, I began to speak. Egrafen, I was writing, or I began to write. So for each of these forms, you provide 2 English translations. I was speaking, or I began to speak. I was writing, I began to write. I was leading, ago, or I began to lead, and so on. So that's exercise 22.1. And then you also need to learn vocabulary 22.2, second set of vocabulary words, and you need to do exercise 22.2, which is quite a bit longer, provide 2 English translations for imperfect tenses, and then you need to translate these exercises from the Greek New Testament. Now that's a lot of homework, I know, but this has been a short class. So normally you would have 3 hours of homework, of class, and now you only have about an hour or an hour and a half with Dr. Campbell's videos and my video segments. So you have more time to invest in translation and in learning this new vocabulary, all these words. So again, I stress it, review vocabulary and learn the new vocabulary words. So that's it for chapter 22. Next week, we will spend in chapter 23, which is only a review chapter. Next week, we're only going to review. I may give you a few video segments from Dr. Campbell, but mainly I'm going to give you a short video of my own, just stressing the things that you need to learn for the final exam in Greek 3. Again, if you have not completed the homework up until now, for example, if you haven't done the homework for chapter 21 for the perfect tense, you need to finish that homework. Do it soon. Get up to date. Learn your vocabulary. Study hard. And I look forward to seeing you next semester. We will have class together, and I will explain how that will work in our video next week. God bless you.